Hello, Happy New Year. Are we still saying Happy New Year?
Yeah, just about.
Welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves, and today I'm one third of what we hope will be a fun and informative show. Remember, folks, the Echo Chamber podcast is a free-flowing conversation that may occasionally touch on mature subjects. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Martin McMahon. How are you, Martin? All good with you?
No, not bad, Tony. Happy New Year to you too.
More importantly, we're delighted to be joined in the Tortoise Shack by political director and social democrat representative for Dublin Mid West, Anne-Marie McNally. Anne-Marie is a creator of what was the locked out generation hashtag that we've discussed on the pod previously, and is someone who spent her career in and out of politics, joining the dots between politics and what happens in our everyday lives. Anne-Marie, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's no, honestly, it was great. Now we were kind of wondering how do we kick off 2018 with a bit of a bang, and there's a lovely continuity to having actually had Glenn in, who spoke about the topics that were facing the younger generation. We had Joan Collins in here, who actually said, you know, the people who are under 35 who wouldn't even have the courage to go in and talk to a bank manager and say, what's the story with a mortgage? And you know, and there's something to be said to that, because I know you instigated that movement that the Social Democrats really were at the forefront of. So I suppose there's no better place to start. You guys have your conference in 2 weeks.
We do, the 26th and 27th of January in the Royal Marine in Dunleary.
Yeah.
It's probably the first major policy conference of the party. Last year when we had our conference, you know, we were relatively new, and a lot of that was about putting in place the structures. Yeah. We elected our first national executive on that at last year's conference. So this year we've got a very wide branch network around the country who've submitted motions, so there'll be quite a lot of intense debate over the 2 days, and we're really looking forward to it.
Well, there's actually something to be said for the fact that this is actually building momentum now, because we're all about a unity of the left. Let's tell the truth here. And I know that your political leaders have actually not ruled out, like some of the other guys working with other parties. You know, there's none of this, I won't talk, the infighting on the left. Is that something that you're kind of passionate about at this stage?
Yeah, sometimes though I think it can be quite naive to talk about unity of the left. I mean, there's branches and strands of the left that are as different as we are from Fine Gael.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are different ideologies underpinning things. And what we've said is we'll be prepared to talk and work with anybody with like-minded ideas and with a vision for a social democratic Ireland.
Yeah.
And we're very strong in that. I mean, we didn't set up a party, you know, glibly. It's a big undertaking. It's a mammoth task that we're kind of on the road of doing. So it wasn't because we wanted to create more of the same or because we thought it existed already. It didn't. We've never had social democracy in Ireland. And we think it's really important to work towards that aim.
I also think that the notion of disunity on the left is very overplayed. I mean, there's disunity, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, exactly. You know, there's disunity on the right, and they sue. I mean, come on, they take each other into court and they sue each other. I mean, talk about it, so bad. Now, the left will have an argument or a spat, but I don't yet think anybody on the left has taken anybody else into court over disagreements, and that happens on the right.
And you see, the problem is, I think a lot of the stuff you see that's purported to be disunity on the left is because there's no major cohesive block, say like Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. So you've got the smaller group, so when one person has a falling out with somebody in another group, it's amplified. Whereas when you have a big cohesive group, you have the whole party mechanism that keeps those things under wraps.
I don't know. I wouldn't have thought that Fianna Fáil or indeed Fine Gael are big cohesive groups. I think there are little fiefdoms that work together.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. The party structure can kick in to cover up those kind of things. Whereas on the left, that doesn't happen. So you've each of the little groups and they're banging off each other, and it's a more. And when we say it's a more public thing, it's not really, to be honest.
No, it's not.
It's within the echo chamber.
But it plays into a lovely cliche of what's the first thing on the the left agenda is the first thing on the agenda is the split, and it is a cliche, just much like the same. I saw I listened to Fia Kelly being challenged by Simon Carswell this week, and Simon Carswell said, I don't know if people are ready to take Sinn Féin seriously, and Fia Kelly went, well, but if you read their pre-budget submission, if you put a red banner on it, it would have been every bit of what the Labour Party would produce, but so people were just dismissive purely because the name on the brand.
There was I can't remember which show, I think it was Sean O'Rourke. They had a panel in and they were talking about who'd be the next president, you know, and they were talking politics as well, and they were very dismissive of the impact that Mary Lou would have as leader of Sinn Féin. And I think there's a huge dynamic going to come in there. And it's a dynamic that we've seen both with the Social Democrats as well. When you put women at the top of parties, you get a different type of politics. And I think this dismissiveness, it just doesn't apply to women in like Sinn Féin. It applies to women right across the board.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. I'd like to think it's not as big an issue as it is, but unfortunately, I suspect it probably is. But that said, yes, the pre-budget submission, you might be able to read it and suggest that it's the same as Labour's or Solidarity's or anybody else's. But really, when you drill down into it, it's not, because the culture of a party is massively important, and it's that old adage about it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Yeah.
That counts. So you can say whatever you want that might sound palatable.
It's what you do in elections.
It is. Well, no.
I know. I'm just throwing it out there.
You saw something very similar like that. I think you mentioned to me this morning about Leo this morning on Morning Ireland. Was that? Saying one thing and
no. What bothered me this morning was the fact that we have articles now across the media where Leo has said that he's going to spend money tackling climate change as opposed to spending money on fines for not tackling climate change. Now, the truth of the matter is we've produced report after report over the last few years where we've acknowledged that we won't tackle climate change because we have emission targets to hit by 2020 that we were unlikely to get within 70% of. Now, they've already said, well, this will cost us 35 million in fines, and the government have already budgeted for this bloody thing. All that's happened today is that Leo said, well, Storm Eleanor hit us, and we had a hurricane, and we had these things. Maybe we'll get out in front of this and say we're going to do something about climate change. When in real, they've been in power since 2011.
No way.
Well, look, Catherine Murphy, as she sat on the Environment Committee in the 31st Dáil, and she's been saying this for a long, long time, failure to invest in things like infrastructure and public transport is having a massive impact on our climate emissions. And she kept saying all along, and others have been saying the same, that we were going to be facing these very real cash fines.
Yep.
So it was counterproductive not to be investing. Now, I completely agree with you. It's ridiculous to be suddenly waking up to that fact.
In 2018.
2 years out.
Yeah.
And it is a case of, look, now it's an issue, and that's the problem with politics in Ireland, is there's never any long-term strategic thinking. It's all about election to election and what's palatable to the electorate in a particular election campaign.
There was some strategic thinking, and I'm just going to switch it slightly from the Social Democrats over the new proposals for health care.
Absolutely.
And I read this week that there has been virtually zero implementation of anything that was contained in Sláinte Care whatsoever.
Well, actually, interestingly, as I was driving over here today, I was listening to Simon Harris being interviewed on the News at 1 in relation to the current trolley crisis, and he identified his top 3 priorities for the next year. One of which was the full implementation, maybe not the full, but certainly the implementation of Sláinte Care. So, we intend, it was Roisin Shortall and the party that took the initiative to bring together all parties to create a committee and to get the Sláinte Care report, which was, a difficult task, to get it to completion. So we now intend fully to lean on, as much as is needed, the minister and other interest groups to bring that implementation about, because that's been the problem with Ireland for so long. We have this implementation deficit. There's a lot of, as you said, the pre-budget submissions, not people talk a great game. When it comes to actually doing it, that's an entirely different story.
My favourite quote is by an American activist, and he said, all the solutions to all the world's problems exist. It's implementation that we lack. And it's as simple as that, really, when it comes to something like, when people sit here and they say to you, Norway or Sweden does it better. They do it better. They just implement it. We can go and we'd Hazel Larkin sit here and tell us about how in Singapore they can build into your salary that you actually save for deposit for a mortgage, that by the time you hit 35, when you go to a bank, you've got skin in the game. Just on that,
something interesting to me though. I've been off sick the last while, and I was watching The West Wing repeats, And there's that really brilliant piece of dialogue where Sam Seaborn is talking about education being the silver bullet.
Yeah.
And there's just a fantastic piece of dialogue where he explains it. But at the end, he says, I just haven't figured out how to do it yet.
Right.
And I love the idea that, that shouldn't stop ambition. Of course it shouldn't stop ambition. The challenge is to figure out how to do it. And I think we've never moved beyond trying to figure out how to do it. it's because we run from election cycle to election cycle, things just constantly churn over.
Which is why we're world class at making plans to plan to do
exactly.
things, and as opposed to implementing. We are world class. We actually set targets to produce plans. We don't set targets to implement plans.
Lists.
And it's one of the main reasons that the Social Democrats came about, was to say, enough of this five-year election cycle things.
Yeah.
Let's start looking at the long-term vision. Catherine Murphy has a fantastic phrase that she uses. It's about the next generation, not the next general election. And that really is kind of a guiding principle of the Social Democrats. Like, let's look beyond ourselves.
Well, that comes down to what we said. What we're here to talk about, Martin, all the time now is joining the dots. So to be able to show that person who's just left college and coming out into the workforce that actually, you're being hit with exorbitant rents, you're being hit with stealth taxes, you're being hit with all of these things, and the reason that matters is because we haven't. The bigger picture is we haven't delivered value from, whether it's corporate tax. I mean, yesterday's statistics were flabbergasting. The corporate tax rate, the highest in the history of the state. And yet, that's on the back of where we're not actually collecting taxes.
It's crazy. But I mean, even again, going back to Simon Harris's interview this afternoon, his three priorities, one of the others was increased bed capacity by this time next year. That's laudable, of course it is. But the reality is, we're churning out medical graduates, doctors, nurses. We're putting them into a society where they can't afford to rent, they can't afford to get a mortgage. So what are they doing? They're leaving, they're going somewhere else. So we can talk about bed capacity, but if we can't staff those beds because we're not joining up the dots between, the housing issues, the health issues, the education issues.
Well, there was a piece in the paper this weekend, and to qualify for a mortgage now you need a basic income of 77,000.
And a deposit of roughly 56,000.
Yeah, now you give me one nurse who's in that position, and yet 20 years ago when Beaumont was first put in there, nurses could afford to buy in the area they worked in.
There are 48 houses up less than 2 miles from here by the O'Coolan cooperative that were built for 150,000.
That's right, yeah.
I jogged up to them the other day, snapped a photo and said it can be done. What we have is a problem whereby the statistic is that less than 5% of new builds are for first-time buyers. Yeah. So we have a huge problem, and when you have people like Owen Murphy coming out and saying some a ridiculous comment, he said, "Well, we need to start building more houses."
That's interesting to me actually, because we hear so much about supply, and there's no doubt supply is a problem. But that said, I was out the other day. We took a drive around South County Dublin, around the hills and that, and we're coming back through Farnham and those kind of areas. And I was genuinely shocked at the level of new developments I seen. Like Ragar was unbelievable actually, and I was kind of going, there's so many new places popping up. The thing is, they're completely out of most people's reach. That's the reality.
And that's why you've just identified that they're being built in places where and the prices are going to be all in excess of 375,000 just to get your foot in the door. You're not going to get your foot in the door unless you're able to. You're a trader up, and you've taken equity from the house that you're selling.
The amount of cash buyers at the present moment.
Look, supply is an issue, but affordability is a massive issue, and that's the reality of the situation.
And if they can build a house up the road for 150,000, they can build it for.
Actually,
they can build it anywhere.
Back in the past when we did direct building in this country, when county councils actually built houses, they couldn't build them better value. Then they could have somebody else build them for them. And when you have a crew of guys who are employees and working for you, they only get better as time goes on, not worse. You see, we live in this economy where everybody's contractor, everybody's subcontractor, and there is the skills and the expertise that were needed by the county councils to do this. They do exist, but these guys are working on office sites, getting 500 quid a week or 600 quid a week for labouring, and nobody's getting any cuts out of this at all. It doesn't pay to have the system the way it is. It would pay better to do direct bills.
But again, there's the joining up the dots issue as well, because we can't ignore, in the construction industry, the 0 hour contract issue pops up again. And
they don't even have. Theirs is just entirely bogus self-employment. The 0 hours contracts don't even.
Yes,
don't
there
even
you go. You're
figure.
right. Yeah. But it does mean that like, I mean, my brother was one, for example, construction workers who were doing okay during the boom and doing pretty well during the boom, but were maybe like mid-40s and that. Then the crash hit.
They had to run.
Pretty much looking at the stockpile. They're there. My brother got a taxi license and he's been driving ever since.
That's
but
right. There's
so
some
many
great
people out there.
bricklayers driving taxis.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, and I'm going to bring this back to a macro thing that happened yesterday in the tax take that wasn't really picked up on. Employment was actually, I think, 7% ahead of
100%.
7% ahead of the target.
Of the target, which doesn't already include bogus self-employment.
Well,
remember.
Can you shut up for a second and I'll tell you how it works? That they're ahead on employment by 7% and they're below an income tax take by 1.8%.
Yeah. We keep saying it's not about quantity of jobs, it's about quality of jobs. I mean, there is very little point in creating these, flimsy be there today but not tomorrow kind of jobs. That's not employment. I don't care what way you want to phrase it.
And that's the locked out generation again. That's the people who come out of college and they're told, we're getting to the stage. I'm only terrified that when you look at the statistics in America and you look at the problems of what happened with the youth is that they all have student debt and they can be pursued for forever. And we have this kite being flown already in our government are looking at, we'll start looking at some form of student loan system. So what you'll have is not only will they come out into crap contracts, but it'll come out with a debt of 25 to 30,000 euro to actually repay. So you'll be a slave to your education, and your employer won't even be paying you enough to cover that. Never mind live a sustainable life.
Well, just to clear one thing up though, the lockout generation, it's not exclusively people coming out of college.
No,
I mean
clearly
people
not.
in their mid-30s factor into it.
It's the 25 to 35-year-old generation that are at the first. That's the first decade generation that is poorer than their parents' generation in the history of the state.
Absolutely, and I mean, most of my friends would be, well-educated, people with third-level education in decent enough jobs. But just before I came over there today, we'd organised a friend's birthday in a few weeks, so we're heading out for a few nights, and one of my friends replied and said, "You know what, lads, I can't afford it." That's the reality. Somebody who's 36 years of age, the mortgage is killing her.
Well,
I can't afford a night out with friends.
Well, we saw it just before Christmas there, where locked out generation is now beginning to include OIPs. And there was a man who was left homeless, put out Christmas week. Now, of course, Fine Gael didn't want that bad publicity, and that situation was resolved really quickly. But somebody else lost out for that situation to be resolved quickly, and that's how this works. It's not that an extra place was immediately manufactured. It's that somebody was told, no, you can't have that place.
And it's the people who, can't get on the radio programmes or don't have an advocate or can't advocate for themselves that are unfortunately left behind. And, there's the lockdown generation, the left behind generation. But, I mean, even in relation to, things like family formation and that.
Yeah.
We have people in their mid-30s who are terrified of having a baby because, they're in rented accommodation with no 10-year security and they're in a job where they don't know if it'll exist next week. So how can you plan
You're living in
situation?
purgatory. Absolutely. There's a lot of people living in purgatory, and the problem is, as we keep saying, joining the dots from that to the fact that we have... Leo's tweet this week saying how he had slow and steady sustainable growth, where he talked about these things that steps that they
society
take.
Is what it says.
But I mean, how can you feel a linkage or an affinity to a society that completely negates your experience? That you don't have any fabric holding you into it, you don't have housing, you don't feel that you can trust the health system, you don't feel like you can start a family. If you have a child, you're struggling to pay for the free education provided to that child. It's very difficult to feel an affinity with that society.
The problem is that we know there's a cohort there, and we also know that there's a two-tier society, and enough of it is piling on that he doesn't want to represent the majority of people. He wants to represent 36% of people who will be enough to cobble together a government to maintain.
Well, you see, and they surround themselves with similar people, and we'll take it just this week that the outgoing chief of the housing association,
Conor Skeen,
and this guy is he's like a hand grenade. The stuff that he's coming out with is outrageous. And Mary McAuliffe, who was on here, she took it apart and said, you're back to this sort of Victorian mindset. But that started a couple of months before Christmas on Tonight TV3 with a woman who sat up there, and she basically said there is no housing problem. And she was the first to publicly say it.
But I gave a lecture recently to the MA students in DCU on communication stuff, and we spoke about this concept of influencers, and it's one of the oldest tricks in the book in relation to PR. So, Leo had said some things that he shouldn't have said about homeless people. Instead of just having the absolute guts to stand up and say, you know what, I messed up, lads. Shouldn't have said it, I was wrong. What do? They roll out these important people.
Damien English,
inverted commas.
Eileen Gleeson,
exactly.
Conor Skean.
And these important people are to give weight and veracity to what Leo said. And then the idea is that you've got Mary and Ballinasloe saying, well, Janie, if he's saying it, maybe Leo might have been right about that. It was when he had said that the homeless figures weren't bad compared to international stuff. And suddenly there was this raft of people coming out. I mean, that literally is one of the oldest PR tricks in the book.
Yeah.
I mean, why should we be getting the PR tricks? He's paying $5 million for a strategic comms unit.
And today, did I hear just before I came out that Mary Mitchell O'Connor blew through?
That's right.
Blew through the barrier for her new press
Yeah.
advisor. 13,000 above the base rate for her press advisor.
Well, she has lost one already. I mean, come on.
But look, and then all over Christmas, there's this constant narrative about social media, how bad social media is. It needs to be controlled. We had, who was the numpty that said that you need to use your passport or your PSA? And I'm oh my God, where do they get these people? But anyway, he's saying that, and it's like an arms race. They really hate social media because social media doesn't give them the chance to lie. It's disseminated very quickly.
But you're wrong as well, because it gives them a great opportunity to lie very quickly. If you couldn't lie on social media, Donald Trump couldn't tweet. Okay, you can lie all day on social media. What you want is the narrative that you're. There's the truth. Everything Leo Varadkar tweeted about the cut in USC, the change to carers allowance, all of these things, that was all true. It was true, Martin. It just wasn't true in how it affects people's lives.
Yeah, context is key.
Exactly. So he's not a liar. They're not lying. They went off. They spent $15,000 to go off to meet the Tories PR people pre-Christmas, and they got told, "Don't lie to the people. Just put it in the most favourable way."
Make it palatable.
So same way, Owen Murphy said, I can't say that next year it won't get worse in the homelessness crisis, because we know it will.
Yeah, this thing you were talking about, Tony, Simon Harris was at that during the week as well. I think you tweeted about it. It was to do with the spinal operation.
Oh no, he didn't. But I was just so frustrated when I read Simon and his promise that no effort would be spared in tackling the current crisis. And I just said that was the actual line he used at the beginning of last year for children who were awaiting scoliosis surgeries. And then, of course, he was shown in November to have not met that commitment, and that efforts had been spared, and that people, what they did was they actually changed the targets. So you go from somewhere we say, no one will be left on the trolley was one of the ones for less than for more than 12 hours. They just moved the goalposts so they could actually say, we've actually hit our target. You go, yeah, but you moved the target from 12 hours to 36 hours, and that's why you hit your target. And the fact that they get away with peddling this crap.
Well, even this week there was the numbers of patients on trolleys. There was a difference between the way the HSE counted them.
That's right,
and the way they were counted by the nurses. And I called it slippery sleevingism, and that's what it is. And we get that with housing. We also get it with education too. And just to bring back that point in education that you brought up on access to education, Anne-Marie, one of my I suppose the politician I'd put head and shoulders above any other ever in the history of the state is Donogh O'Malley, because Donogh O'Malley introduced free secondary school education, and he had to be extremely political about it. He worked politics to its nth degree. He's also a politician who swapped between parties. He was a journeyman politician, and he did more for this country than anybody. But you've really strong feelings on primary education.
I have strong feelings on education in general. As somebody coming from a very working class background, and I have a joke with my colleague that I always say that, but I do always say it for a reason, because for me, growing up, I didn't feel represented. So I think it's important that people hear, that somebody from a working class background can become, involved in politics at a senior level. But for me, it was access to education that gave me that opportunity to do it. And a strong family pushing me through education. And I'm very conscious that so many people I grew up with didn't have those supports. And the education system needs to be strong enough to provide those supports. And to encourage people through. And I know Gary Gannon, my colleague, is also a recipient of the Trinity Access programme, which he credits with giving him the opportunities that he's had. And I really believe that unless we see education as the silver bullet from primary level all the way through.
Well, you do
third
know
level,
that the capitation rates for primary are...
It's completely crazy. I mean, I have a 9-year-old in the so-called free primary education system. And it's constant. It's a constant demand for money. If it's not the voluntary contributions, it's the registration fee at the start of the year, it's the art fee, it's the music fee. I mean, you literally pay for every single thing along the way.
And schools are getting very shitty about this voluntary contribution.
It's strong demands, I would call it, rather than requests.
There is, absolutely. And again, but you have to look at the school and say the reason they're doing that is because funding has been slashed at the back end.
Yeah.
So Martin, it's almost, if we were to use the context, it's like let's punch down because it's easier than punching up.
No, I 100% agree with that. There's it's not the school's fault because they are not being funded to provide the services, and that is the point I'm making. Is because the state is not viewing education as the silver bullet. It's the only thing that will break intergenerational poverty.
Yes,
it's the only opportunity for children who are growing up in areas or families or situations where they don't see opportunities, they don't see escape routes for themselves. The education system needs to be that easily accessible, open escape route. It's not a privilege. It shouldn't be a privilege. And the idea that, I grew up in Rialto and Dolphin's Barn. I'd never set foot in the gates of Trinity College, ever. To me, that was something that was, other people go there.
Yeah.
And I know right now there's people, before I started working in politics, I was working in Dolphin House in the community development project in there. And there's children that just it would never be on their radar. When I was in school, I went to secondary school in Golden Bridge in Inchicore, and the Hickeys factory was on the side lane. For so many, that was seen as the goal.
Yeah.
Get the third year, get the intercert, and get into Hickeys. That was literally it, We need to be instilling ambition into our young people, and the only way to do that is through the education system.
And more importantly, that comes back to why it absolutely destroys Leo's Republic of Opportunity and talks about a Republic of Equality. Yeah. That if you had a one-tier school system like they have that function in Scandinavian countries where you don't need, whereas what we found out last week is that the private school system actual fees that are being paid in have surpassed Celtic Tiger levels again.
And don't forget the state subsidises private education.
Well, the recognised best education system in the world is in Finland. And it's the recognised best education system in the world. And the very first thing they did was scrap private education.
Yeah.
That's how they made their system the best system. Their kids go to school the least amount of hours. They get no homework. I mean, these people have rethought education.
They have, yeah.
So we know that there's a blueprint over there, and the blueprint produces happy kids.
Fulfilled and complete
making
kids
their potential.
Adults.
Now, we know it works. We know it's actually cheaper overall than the twin system you have going here. Yeah. And the plan is sitting there and it's laid out in front of us, but over here then, I remember, I'm going to name a name, David Quinn, when this issue about access to schools came up, and it was the first time I got blocked by David Quinn, and he was going...
First time.
How many accounts have you got?
And he was saying that, I was saying access to schools should be entirely based upon your locality and whether you have a sibling in the school or not. There you go. Very easy set of rules. And he goes, oh no, what about their religious persuasion? I said, it's school, it's education. Let the kids get education. But there is a whole cohort of people out there who want to keep the school system in a two-tiered
There is, yeah. Although having said that, I do think, and the Finnish model is a great model. It really is, and I think it's really important as well to make the point that when I say I think education is the silver bullet, I mean education in all its forms. It's not about putting somebody through the rigor of primary, secondary, and third level as a must. It's about creating the conditions and the environment that allows people to fulfil their own potential. So that might not be Trinity College, but it may well be the capacity to go and create or.
Well, very Marxist of you.
Well, no. In Germany, half of all third level placements are apprenticeships.
Yeah, vocational stuff.
Okay, and they are apprenticeships, and then you go to South Korea, and to get a job in McDonald's, you have to have an honours degree. There's an awful lot of people walking around, highly educated, who can't get work. Yeah. Third level degrees are not necessarily the way forward. When everybody has one, what's the value of it?
No, but Mark, that's not. I suppose what we're trying to talk about here is if you're going to actually create a culture where people can go and education has to be what it has to be for you to be fulfilled and actually prepare you for what you're going to do with the rest of your life. There also needs to be social mobility, and that there has to be somebody has to lead a blueprint that actually says there are actual opportunities here. What we have currently is literally a two-tier structure, and again.
Do you know, one of the things that got me really worked up over Christmas, and I tweeted about it late at night and kind of lost the plot a bit. I'd watched that movie Cardboard Gangsters.
Yeah.
With John Connors, and it's a fairly gritty. I think it was Dublin based, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Movie about young lads in Darndale, getting involved in the drugs game and how it works. And I grew up with that, right? And I grew up with these guys and women around me who were so shrewd and brilliant strategists. And had that been able to be deployed in other walks of life, they would be top of their game right now. Instead, they deployed it in the only way that they knew how, in the only opportunity they seen, which was the drugs trade. Like, I grew up, as I said, in Rialto, in the middle of Fatima Mansions at Dolphin House, when the heroin epidemic hit Dublin. So that was the opportunity that was presented to the young people that I grew up with. I don't see myself as and Gary makes this point constantly, oh, well, you got out. I happened to be lucky. That I had a supportive family who were aware of the importance of education. But friends and people that I grew up with weren't that lucky. That shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the case that you can fall between the cracks.
Well, I suppose, and I see it, I agree with you, but I also see that if you've missed that opportunity straight out of leaving secondary school, it shouldn't be the case that opportunity is gone for life.
Oh, no.
You should be able to, there should be a support system in place so you can walk in your mid-30s and say, look, what I worked at is gone. I need to re-educate. I have a wife, I have 2 kids, I have a mortgage. Now, how am I going to do this? And there has to be a pathway for somebody to do that.
And I mean, there are fantastic access programs. The Trinity Access Program is a great example. The DIT Access Program, they're not as widely known as they should be. They're also not they're not as easy to access if, as I say, you haven't had the benefit of education in the early years, if you don't have the ability to advocate for yourself or to go and seek the opportunities. So I think there needs to be a lot more work done, and Gary is actually working with the Trinity Access Programme in helping make that happen, because I can't emphasise enough how I feel coming from where I came from, the importance of it.
There's the name escapes me, but an economist, a famous libertarian economist, who says the greatest problem with the greatest loss to humanity is the talent that's trapped in what he calls the third world. Yeah. So just because Billy was born poor doesn't mean that Billy didn't have it in him to be Bill Gates.
Well, this to me, I've said it quite a lot, that there are children who starve to death who could be the next Einstein, and they never get the opportunity to get there.
And the reverse is often the case as well. Like, if you look at the attrition rates into third level, so South County Dublin, it's almost 100%, as opposed to North Inner City Dublin, where it's like 6% or something. There's so many of that 100% out in South County Dublin who shouldn't really be in third level. It's not where they want to be. It doesn't suit who they are. It's because there's an expectation and there's a conveyor belt. And they're walking around with these degrees that really mean nothing to them. whereas they would have been much better off being able to pursue, if they were creative, if they were an artist, if they were music, whatever, being able to pursue what suited them. And like, it's a conversation for a different day, minimum basic income. But I did read a fantastic piece about a city, I think it was in Utah, who had introduced it.
UBI.
It was a really interesting piece, but one of the things that really stood out to me was the mayor said that he was excited to see what happened when citizens had the opportunity and they weren't constrained by financial considerations. And I just really think that's an interesting concept when, somebody says, you know what, your mortgage is covered, now do what you want to do.
Well, what it's going to do is very simple. What it's going to do is very simple. If you can turn around, and it's pricing it is the awkward part. You need to price it insofar as that it'll incentivize people to get on, and it won't disincentivize people to, because you will get there's a very small percentage of people who will be malingerers or whatever you want to say. But if you price universal basic income right, and the study in London was phenomenal where they just took 58 guys off the street, and at the end of, I think it was 2 years, 48% of them were net contributors into the tax take. Only 6 had failed to kind of right the ship, and 2 were gone off the rails. So you really had so only 2 out of 58. Now, if you can extrapolate that, because those people were chosen, and I have to say they all had individual problems, whether they're mental health problems or dependencies. They still managed to only have 2 that fell through the net. So this nonsense of people, when given an opportunity, won't take it. It is nonsense.
No, as I said, it is a conversation that I need to have another day, because I'm on the fence on minimum basic income. I'm currently researching and have been for quite a while, and there's good stories and there's bad stories about it, so I've yet to land on a decision on it. I did think that piece, though, about opportunity, not being hamstrung by financial considerations, I thought that was interesting.
I'd like us to move on a little from, and we must bring this up because it was everywhere yesterday, what happened in Dundalk.
Yeah.
And we know that a young Japanese man, I think he was 25 years of age, was killed, and very tragic. We also know that another young man, 18 years of age, has been arrested. And beyond that, we know that it wasn't terrorist related. That's all anybody knows right this minute. But we had this flood, this tsunami of racist and Islamophobic bile that just stormed Twitter yesterday. Absolutely stormed Twitter. And from a very small group, as Mark Malone pointed out, that when you look into the followers of these are all cross followers, and it's a core group, a very small group. You didn't like it either, Tony. You had a few bits to say about it on Twitter, I think.
As far as Twitter, I didn't actually say too much other than that I said I think I poked fun at the guys because they were commenting about stuff they didn't know. I thought it was hilarious that you had these. I hate giving these guys oxygen. So what I said on Twitter was that we Willy Wacists were all upset, and that mammies were they were all overexcited, is what I said, because they were so quick to come in with this nonsense, and words like jihad were thrown around.
Well, not only on social media.
No, I was just about to say that. Yeah, it was a conversation that was happening outside of Twitter and social media as well, and there was that kind of. I mean, when I heard the lunchtime news yesterday, I was in a cafe where there was a crowd of people, and I seen the eyes go to heaven when they said that I was a man of Middle Eastern origin.
Oh yeah, first of all he was Syrian. Immediately he was Syrian,
and then he was Egyptian.
But Pat Kenny had a interesting segue this morning. He was talking about the incident to is it Conor Feehan from INM? Anyway, Conor was on the ground, I think, up in Dundalk, and he said, we need to have, when are we going to have the conversation about the role immigration played in this attack? So that was the word. Now, and then he went straight in. He goes, after the break, we're going to talk about, there was a tragic event where a young man was killed in a fast food restaurant, was kicked in the head, and he died, and a gang of youths. And he said, attacks by our own, on our own. Jesus. And I just thought, Jesus Christ, Pat, what a segue. You've just literally nailed your colours to the mast. Yeah. You've said, done by others, terrorism, done by our own, tragic incident.
Yeah, boys will be boys.
Yeah, and irresponsible, and I'd like to think unintentional.
I think so.
It shouldn't be unintentional.
Yeah, but there was some very intentional stuff from people that you wouldn't expect it from. I mean, I had words with somebody yesterday. I was saying, wait for the facts. Don't be presumptive. And this guy was, what do we do now? We'll hear that he had mental problems. I'm going, now you're just off the scale. And this is a guy who's going to be standing for election in Ireland. And I'm like, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, Jesus.
Unreal.
That's worrying, all right. But, I mean, even if the facts had have borne out that it was a terrorist incident, that still doesn't legitimise, the kind of evil thing of, the immigrants. It's all, they're a danger. It doesn't legitimise that. Like, there are, unfortunately, dangerous, crazy, evil people in every race.
35% of the people working in the health system are non-nationals, multi-faith, including Islam. Any of these people who go, they're all this, they're all that. They're the people who are changing your elderly mother's nappy in the nursing home. Yeah. They are the people who are putting the IV into your dad in A&E. Stop with your nonsense.
Yeah.
I suppose it'd be remiss of us not to actually come in and say, well, look, we have an actual politician in our midst, and not ask, given where we are, given the Leo bounce and what we're looking at, that we just avoided the election in pre-Christmas. Are we looking at an election this year, do you think? And are we in campaign mode?
First of all, just to correct it, an aspiring politician as opposed to a politician. I think we're in election mode. I would wager that we're looking at an election this year. I would think in the earlier half of the year as well. I think we've been up to the top of the hill one too many times.
The Grand Old Duke of Cork.
I don't see it lasting beyond the year. And look, there is obviously the argument of no politician wants an election. But the reality of it is, I'm not sure they're going to have the luxury of that.
There was one thing that bothered me all Christmas where they said, no one wants to be the people who are blamed for going to the polls. And I thought, in what world? No one in that cohort of maybe the current incumbents want to be the people who are blamed, but the people who are left behind, we quite welcome.
That's interesting to me though, because obviously when the election looked like it was looming before Christmas and panic stations hit, we'd do a normal Saturday canvass, but that Saturday we really ramped it up. We went into campaign mode. And I would have been of the same opinion to you. I was really kind of railing against this nobody wants an election narrative. I hit the doors, nobody wanted an election. Like, they really didn't. There was, like, real visceral anger on the doors.
Yeah.
And it was a plague on both their houses, actually, at the time.
Yeah. And
it was a Saturday afternoon, we were canvassing, the News at 1 was on, and Micheál Martin was giving an interview, and people were literally reefing open their doors, like, they were pulling them out. See what he's saying in there? Like, it was proper anger about it.
But I also think, too, that much like a heart has X number of beats in it, a political party has X number of elections in it. And the faster you cycle through, I love how the Italians do. Don't like him, fuck you, get the next one in. And they just cycle through, and it doesn't harm their economy. It doesn't upset their society. And yet here they are, I can't have election. Oh, no, Jesus, no. I mean, it's the only democratic thing you can do in this country. But no, we can't be having to... Jeez, imagine the proles coming out and voting more than once every 5 years.
Yeah,
I think just fucking cycle through them, get through them fast, one every 6 months, until we have exhausted the fucking pool of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael lies, and we can move forward.
Well, actually, I kind of disagree in the sense that I would like to see some stability with strategic vision in this country. I think that's something we've really lacked. Now, stability doesn't mean more of the same. Stability means something that's going to actually set about creating plans that, whether they stay or go, the plans will stay and they'll be implemented. Sláintecare is a great example of that. It's a 10-year plan, for example. That said, I think this year it's not just consideration for the parties. I think there are external factors, not least a repeal referendum, a presidential election looming. They will all play into it. In the presidential election, for example, campaign funding and all those kind of considerations will be foremost in strategists' minds about whether or not it's the right time to go or not time to go. That said, there is the issue, there will be an issue needed for an election. It's not as simple as Fianna Fáil deciding that they want an election, or Fine Gael for that matter.
They need a scandal.
They'll need a scandal, or they'll need something to legitimately say they're going to the people on. Now look, in this government /supply and confidence arrangement, we're never short or we're never
Oh, yeah, it's like,
around the corner from
it's
a
like
scandal.
I don't know, it's like the Simpsons, the Mr. Burns diseases. They're just all such in balance that they're keeping them alive. Just, there's no one disease that's popping up to kill them all.
Exactly. But they won't be wanting for an issue is what I would say.
No, I don't think that we want for an issue, but I do think there's also reticence in the big two as they are to actually... This is the Fianna Fáil want to be able to get some credit for saying they made this work. They made the supply and confidence agreement work, and Fine Gael want to try and put enough daylight between them that they can eat a little bit more and hang on to drag just enough of the negative equity generation up to feeling that
they're actually doing all right.
If they could get to another budget where they could actually... because the receipts are huge, like the money that's coming in are huge. They can, for all their talk of sustainability and all the rest of it, you watch if they can get to another budget, they'll be going, listen, we need to start giving out the goodies again.
That's a major consideration. It's one of the external factors I talked about it. And our policy director Paul Cassidy has flagged this for quite a while. This year's budget, the fiscal space loosens up.
Yes.
It gives Fine Gael the opportunity to have a somewhat giveaway budget. Right, so wrong of that aside, that will be foremost in Fianna Fáil's mind.
Oh, yeah.
They are not going to want to sit back and watch Fine Gael give out party favours come October's budget. So that will be a serious consideration in that.
It has to be right now. It has to be at the front of their minds that
Yep.
if we get to October, all bets are off, because Leo will be walking around with handfuls of bowls of sweets to people.
Well, it's funny how things go. I reckon an issue far less impactful than Francis Fitzgerald's going to bring down this government.
It probably will be, yeah.
Far less impactful. I think, they're just
a little banana skin that they
yeah,
handle
just
wrong.
something
The
that
one
ticks
thing
the
that
box
bothers
at the
me
right
about the
time.
Francis Fitzgerald things that we call it the Francis Fitzgerald thing. They tried to destroy a man.
Oh, I know.
And we still talk about this as if because the Taoiseach had to resign, and you go, no, because they tried to actually destroy a man who did the right thing.
Well, you see, that necessarily hasn't gone away. To me, we're talking about banana skins that come up.
We're 4 days away from the resumption of the Charlton.
Yeah, I think Charlton will
that
throw
to
a lot of
me
banana
is
skins.
this is going to be the issue. If you want a banana skin to bring them down, you're just going to be piling them up there in the corner. Pick your one, pick whichever one you want to bring them down. There's still questions. They sort of came to agreement to look, we'll fudge this over
There's
Christmas.
a lot of questions left.
And anybody who's read Mick Clifford's book over the Christmas knows there are some major questions here need answering that can't be answered.
And just one other interesting thing about it, we talk about bringing them down. Don't also discount the fact of them wanting to come down. Like Leo has a serious judgment call to make here. At the most we're going to next February. That's the absolute max. So does he hang on that long and risk losing popularity and potentially not being re-elected? And let's not forget that he wasn't elected by the Fine Gael grassroots in the first place to the party leadership position. So does he hang on and take that risk, or does he go now when his popularity ratings are high and he has a decent chance of another term as Taoiseach?
I actually think I actually think that he won't make that judgment call. I think that somebody will make that judgment call for him.
John
we call our pet name for Leo here.
#G17.
But our pet name here for Leo is the Tinseltown Taoiseach, and Leo is probably the least serious Taoiseach we've ever had in Irish politics. It's a stepping stone, maybe to a movie career. You never know, but it's a stepping stone for Leo. It's not an end of game for Leo.
No,
he's
and
not
in fairness,
there.
he said as much. He has said he won't stay in politics beyond, I think, was it 45?
But he had said he wasn't a career politician, and then he changed his mind on
Yeah.
that. And now, look, I don't want to even get into the cult of personality.
I was going to say, I'm the same on that, because I don't think that Leo is, intrinsically a bad person. He's ideologically different than me.
Well,
and I
my
disagree
point
with him,
being that when this comes to election, I think that Fine Gael are going to get somewhat of a kicking from their own grassroots.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
But just before, we're not gonna. Martin, when do you think there'll be an election?
By May.
Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I'd concur with that. I think we're Easter throws a little bit of a hair clip into the mix.
They don't want to go to
Easter's it's early. It's early.
I mean, the sensible thing to do, and always the sensible thing to do, is have an election midsummer when you can actually chat to people when they're cutting their grass and they're not freezing their nuts off at a doorway trying to talk to you through a crack.
Post Easter break may be a realistic option because people will have the opportunity over the Easter break to be out on the streets.
I think a long lead-in would be nice too. I think a long lead-in.
We're already in a long lead-in, Martin. So kick that idea out of the. Just blow that idea out of the water. That we're in a long lead-in since it started pre-December. They're in campaign mode. They were told to go into campaign mode. There won't be a microphone that.
But what we don't have, and what we're not seeing, is we're not seeing the candidates from different areas compared to each other. We're not seeing that.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you do that, you're going to get electoral fatigue already. So we're just going to start off on where we're going now. We're going to have is a long lead-in campaign whereby you're going to see every positive thing. Is I think it was said that if there's anything that's so much as a good news story, they want
ramped up.
Where do you think it's going to fall? What do you think is going to be the issue? You with Charlton?
I think Charlton. I think something will come out of Charlton.
Honestly, I'm less convinced there's going to be an election. I think what they're going to get. I think we'll be looking into the autumn, and if they get close to the budget, and I'd say then you'll see Fianna Fáil agitating to bring it down.
I go with Charlton too. I think it's the unknown that's going to take them down. Yeah. I think it's the unknown. I don't think there's going to be any real strategy behind it. I think they're just going to walk into it.
And waiting to budget time gives them the added complication of a possible repeal referendum result that makes things difficult for them.
Look, I just think that I'm okay with being wrong. I don't mind being wrong.
And hey, I'm okay with it being autumn.
Yeah, it's people are look, guys. Long story short, here is we're talking about what's going to happen in an election. Realistically, what really matters is what comes out of the election. So I just want to say, while you're here, Anne-Marie, thanks so much for coming over. You know, when it happens, you'll have, you've no doubt you have two advocates here on your side, because we really think that people like you who are trying to say join the dots and trying to talk about what actually sustainable change. I don't want to say, you know, we're not going to go strong and stable with the nonsense that crippled the Tories, but we're certainly not going to go keeping the recovery going either. So we're talking about change, and we're talking about making it sustainable, where it brings the rising tide that lifts all boats, as opposed to just the yachts from different parts. Have you anything to add, Martin?
No, nothing at all. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks a mil. Really enjoyed it today.
Again, I just want to thank you all for listening, and remind us that you can subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcast from. The reason, lads, I repeat this, is that every 5-star review gets us more free exposure and helps other people find us. So please take a minute and give us that little bit of support. Keep an eye on the website at echochamberpod.com to find all our previous podcasts and some new blogs. You can send us an email to the echochamberpod@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at echochamberspod. Thanks again, folks. Thank you.